From social media to the streets, many people in Zimbabwe are calling for a change in the country's government.
But can an online movement bring about real change? That's today in The Stream.
I'm Femi OK, and you're in The Stream.
And I'm Omar Badar. Many people in Zimbabwe are fed up. For weeks, protesters have held demonstrations to voice their anger over the worsening economy, bad governance, and corruption.
It's a bleak situation for many Zimbabweans. The economy is close to collapse and people can't afford to feed themselves. A fact complicated by a severe drought, one of the worst in decades. Last month, civil servants were paid several weeks late, and now some are demanding a new government.
And they've turned to social media, a movement spurred by an impassioned speech by Pastor Evan Mawarire and the hashtag #ThisFlag.
Anzi the yellow is for all the minerals. Goride, diamonds, platinum, chrome. I don't know how much of it is left, and I don't know who they sold it to and how much they got for it.
But can this social media movement bring about actual change? Here to discuss this, we have in Harare, Zimbabwe, Farai Moyo. That's a pseudonym because he has safety concerns. He's a member of Concerned Zimbabwe Citizens, which is also a part of the This Flag movement.
Also in Harare, Psychology Mazawiza. He is a member of the ZANU-PF ruling party in Parliament. And from Canterbury in the UK, Alex Magesa. He's a law lecturer at the University of Kent.
And right here in our studio with us, we have Jacqueline Katanexa. She is a contributor with the blog Africa as a Country, so it's good to have you here, everybody. So, Farai, this flag, if you were telling the world about this flag, why is it important, this campaign?
This campaign is important because we, as Zimbabweans, are finally at a point where we want some answers from our government. We are sick and tired of the injustice that we've been seeing in our country for some time now. We're tired of the corruption that we've been seeing, and that seems to go unpunished, and the poverty that is evident for all to see. And so we really just rallied behind Pastor Ivan, when he released that video and, everything that happened after that. Really just because we felt like it was time for us to, get some attention from our government and be heard, and hopefully finally start to see, government deliver the solutions that they promised us when they were elected.
It's a very emotional video. I recommend you watch it. It's on Facebook. Let me play you just a little clip. This is the pastor, and this video was put on Facebook in April. Have a listen.
Wherever I go and I put on the colors of Zimbabwe, they look at me, and as if they want to laugh, they ask me, "Are you from Zimbabwe?" Vachiseka. And sometimes when I look at the flag, it's not a reminder of my pride and inspiration. It feels as if I just want to belong to another country. This flag.
Jacqueline, all the feels right there. There's music underneath it, real passion from the pastor. Why did this go viral? Why do you think Zimbabweans thought, this is what we've been trying to say for a long time?
So I think that's a really interesting question, and I think what this really points to is the political economic situation being mapped by citizens' discontent, and people finally getting to a point where they felt that this was a message that resonated with them, that resonated with the people around them, that resonated with Zimbabweans abroad. And so it was something that people could really get behind. It pointed to their realities, it pointed to people's frustrations in a very real way.
So we have somebody online with an interesting question, TC over here, who says, how do you intend to take this campaign beyond social media to reach even Zimbabweans in rural areas? For the people who say this is just a hashtag campaign or just an online campaign, is it actually more than that? Can it really connect with people?
I think, yes, absolutely. I think Zimbabwe is in a new phase of politics where digital media is playing a large role. There are concerns, as you've pointed out, that it points to some bias, that there are people that are being left out. And I think that this is something that those who are leading the charge in this movement have to really pay attention to. There are calls for it being more inclusive of, as you said, people in the rural areas, but also for people within the urban areas who don't fall within perhaps a socioeconomic class that makes access to certain types of social media readily available. So there's a bit of a middle class bias that's being pointed to as well.
Let me just bring in Psychology. Psychology is an MP in the ruling ZANU-PF party. Psychology, when you started to see this welling of support for this flag campaign, what was the ruling party's initial reaction to it?
Well, firstly, let me say a couple of things. Number one, we don't understand why anybody would call our flag this flag. We have 100% ownership and entitlement to that flag. A couple of things have since arisen from this so-called campaign. Zimbabwe is a constitutional democracy. In other words, it's a country that protects, promotes, and upholds the basic fundamental human rights of the citizens of Zimbabwe. And one of those basic human rights is, of course, the right to freedom of expression. These guys, I have to make this abundantly clear, are making some legitimate, valid, and pertinent points.
Psychology, what are the valid points?
Because these are issues that must be addressed in any society. But
Psychology, what are the valid points? What are the points?
I have to say this. I have to say this. They are making some valid points, but
what are they?
But
what are the valid points, Psychology? Where's the agreement?
I'm struggling to hear you, but let me continue with my point. I'm struggling to hear you, but let me put my point across. The point is this: their anger is misdirected. Why do I say their anger is misdirected? They seem to be angry with President Robert Mugabe, with the government of President Robert Mugabe, with ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF, President Mugabe and his government are not their enemies. Our enemy, our common enemy is the United States of America, it's Britain, it's the European Union, the guys that imposed unjustified, illegitimate sanctions on Zimbabwe. And this is the reason why from 2001, when ZIDERA, the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act, was promulgated in the US Congress, we have gradually gotten to the point where we are. So their anger is misdirected. They ought to be angry. We ought to harness our energy and our power and everything that we can as citizens of this country to say those sanctions that were imposed on Zimbabwe must go as soon as possible, totally and unconditionally.
All right, Psychology, let me just bring in another voice here. Alex, so is that a deflection, or does Psychology have a point here? Is it sanctions that people are upset with?
Oh, no, this is totally to be expected from ZANU-PF. There's nothing new. The sanctions song has been played and replayed for the past 15 years. I'm happy that he acknowledges that this movement, this flag, has legitimate concerns and that there are issues that they're raising which the society must address. But unfortunately, he again is deflecting responsibility, because the responsibility surely is with the government of Zimbabwe. President Mugabe has been in charge for 36 years. There are still issues that he continues to raise, and for any problem that take place in Zimbabwe, they always blame foreigners. And even when Zimbabweans are protesting, as they are doing right now, they argue that Zimbabweans are sponsored by the West, which is totally ridiculous. They don't appreciate that Zimbabweans are adults who can make decisions, who feel the pain, and are entitled, perfectly entitled in terms of the Constitution, to raise these concerns against the government.
So, you know, what Psychology was saying a little bit earlier was essentially that the enemy is the West, and one of the criticisms that President Mugabe had made against actually Pastor Ivan was that he is funded by the West. And we have people reacting on this, about this online, like Nyasha over here, who says Mugabe's criticism of the pastor is not new. He criticizes everyone who criticizes the government, basically is labeled in the same way. And then we have another comment here by Our Zimbabwe saying that the president is out of touch with reality. What do you expect? He doesn't even know the price of boarding a taxi. Farai, I want to get your reaction about this. You know, do you really think that the president is actually out of touch, or do you think he believes those criticisms that he's making against the pastor and this movement?
I definitely believe that the president is out of touch. I believe that most of his government is out of touch with reality and with what we are having to deal with on the ground. When I hear Psychology, quickly hide or duck behind the sanctions thing that we've heard ad infinitum. You know, I can't help but find it ridiculous, like Alex said. We know from 2009 until 2013, we had a government of national unity that operated under the same sanctions that have been present since 2001 that he's referred to. Yet we saw economic growth, yet we saw, you know, a little bit of stability. You know, civil servants were never paid late under that environment. And so, you know, I think that's a very weak argument. The economy actually was starting to show signs of recovery, you know, in that period. So we're not gonna, we don't accept that as an excuse. The president and the government have not done what we feel is enough to combat or stop corruption in the country, you know, within the government itself. That's got nothing to do with sanctions. We feel that, you know, I mean, a corrupt individual can be prosecuted within the confines of the law, and that should, you know, sanctions won't affect that at all in any way. And so we, the citizens of Zimbabwe, really, you know, resonated with Pastor Ivan when he spoke, and a number of us have actually started to say, you know what, we're not going to continue waiting for somebody to come and try and help us to, you know, to bring our own government to account, and we're going to start to insist on them delivering and them doing the things that they promised, you know, when they ran for office.
See, Jacqueline, you're following this movement from abroad. What is it that you want to ask the organisers of this movement, the sort of where the origins come from, about what happens next? Because Pastor Evan was sitting on Facebook, made a very passionate video, and then something blew up. What do you want to ask about what's next?
So I think what many people, both at home and those of us who are abroad, are really interested in knowing is, how do we take what has been mobilized on social media and what has come out of that organically and in an organized way on the streets, both in Zimbabwe and in the diaspora? How do we use that momentum and galvanize each other to move beyond it being just a movement? Because the worry is always that when something like this becomes institutionalized, given the various ideals, actions, and agendas of people on the ground, that it loses the momentum. And so how do we make sure that if this is a legitimate social movement that is representative of Zimbabweans both at home and abroad, how do we institutionalize that in a way that transformative potential can come of it?
We actually got a video comment from somebody who was criticizing the government reaction to all of this, from Zim Patriot. Check it out.
My question is to the representative from ZANU-PF. How do you reconcile the government's harsh response to this flag and people standing up and claiming their rights, whereas at the same time there has been no response with regards to known cases of corruption where ministers, like for example Dr. Chombo, who was the local government minister, who owns vast properties across the country as a result of his office? How come there hasn't been an equal response to that?
Psychology, do you think that it's fair to say that the government response against this movement has been harsher than it was against corruption and other issues that maybe are plaguing the country?
Look, I've said it before that some of the allegations, the claims that they make are legitimate claims. But the fact is this, you can't talk of corruption as if that word was coined for Zimbabwean situations. That word, corruption, you know, is as old as mankind. In other words, the term corruption was coined for the entire society. In other words, there's corruption in the United States, there's corruption in Britain, there's corruption everywhere. But what are we doing about corruption in Zimbabwe? We are doing a number of things. Number one, President Robert Mugabe recently put together an anti-corruption commission, which is busy at work. President Robert Mugabe has instructed the Commissioner of Police to make sure that no stone goes unturned as far as corruption is concerned. But you've got to understand this. We are not going to get people prosecuted just because Pastor Ivan has said so and so is corrupt. The police has to establish a prima facie case. They have to have reasonable grounds to believe that a case of corruption, in other words, public funds were abused for private purposes, before they can bring any person before a competent court of law. And I have to address a number of issues that were raised by my fellow panelists here. The one guy says President Robert Mugabe is out of touch. He believes he's out of touch. Well, it's a mistaken belief. President Robert Mugabe is fully aware of the situation that we are in. Everybody is aware that we are facing problems, and President Mugabe is doing something about that. The issue is this, that the idea that somebody can start a movement, a so-called this flag movement, and this notion that they can make as much noise as they can, cause as much violence as they can, as much destruction as they can, and maybe generate as many international headlines as they can, with the hope that somehow the economy is going to improve, is ridiculous. It's not going to work.
Psychology, let me just ask you one thing here. Psychology, hold tight for a moment.
Let's find solutions.
Psychology, let's make this a conversation rather than a lecture. I'm not aware of violence, but I am aware that the pastor was in court. Have a look here at these pictures here about people rallying outside of the court. Why did you take the pastor to court? What were the charges? What was the issue?
I can't hear you clearly, but you're saying something about Pastor Ivan being in court.
Yeah, what was the issue?
Nobody is above the law. The principle of the rule of law, the principle of the rule of law says nobody is above the law. Not even Pastor Van Maurer is above the law. So if he starts a movement, a so-called this flag movement, which we believe is not his flag, it's our flag. If he has a case to answer, he's going to be brought before a competent court of law to answer to those charges. It doesn't matter that he has started a movement. Nobody is above the law. He's not above the law. President Mugabe is not above the law. Nobody is above the law. And that is what the principle of the rule of law envisages.
He was charged with inciting public disorder. Let me just bring in Farai here. Farai, inciting public disorder, Psychology was suggesting that there might be some violence around this campaign as well. How do you answer that?
I have no idea how the government or how anyone would level those charges against Pastor Ivan, because every single video that I've seen him post, every single comment I've seen him post has been, very clear in asking citizens not to be violent, not to destroy property, to be respectful of others. And, when we were talking about staying at home and just shutting things down, the instruction was to stay home peacefully with your families and not to cause any trouble. So those seem like trumped up charges to me. And I just wanted to respond to Psychology. He made mention of, he said something about how they needed to investigate corruption, any corruption charges, or to determine if there's any case. And I find that hard to believe, because the Auditor General, which is a government position, recently released a long list of financial impropriety within the government, within ministries, with named individuals, named entities that clearly did things that were financially improper. And we haven't heard of any investigations being opened, of any arrests, any questioning, any of that. And so for him to say that the police would need to do their job when the government's very own auditor has pointed out these issues and nothing has been done, again, sounds like, just scapegoating and blame shifting.
So one of the things that Psychology said a little bit ago was that, that President Mugabe is in touch, he's not out of touch, and we have people reacting to this online. Being Charlie says Zimbabweans salvaged their country through immediate leadership change, and we have Sharpstone over here who says the problem right now is that there's rot in every facet of our lives, no rule of law, and no clear plans. Alex, can you see that basically Mugabe can have a plan, or do you have to have a leadership change in order for things to move forward?
No, absolutely. But before I come to that, I think there are a few things that need to be rebutted. Psychology Mazuisa, the Honorable MP, he says President Mugabe is in touch, he's not out of touch. President Mugabe, goes to Singapore for his healthcare needs. His own daughter had to go to Singapore to give birth, which is part of something so basic. They can't even trust the health institutions which are presided over by the president. They've been presided over for the past 36 years. Now, how can you say someone is in touch with reality when they are not even able to use facilities that they preside over? We talk about internal sanctions. I think Farai has made some very important points about corruption. There is lots of corruption. I don't want to be making any allegations here. But, you know, there are a lot of people with a lot of questions to answer, people who get contracts from state-owned companies unprocedurally, people who basically rent, you know, from the state. They collect rents from the state. And as for Pastor Ivan Mawarire, I just wanted to point out to Psychology Mazurisa, if he says there's the rule of law, if he says that Zimbabwe is a constitutional democracy, we know that the magistrate made a very sound judgment and said Pastor Ivan Mawarire had been unlawfully arrested. Now, what has happened to the policemen who arrested him? Have they been brought to book? Are they facing any investigation for carrying out an unlawful arrest? What happened to people who abducted and tortured Justina Mukoko in 2008? Have those people been brought to book? Have they been arrested? Has there been any charges against them? We can go on with a whole list of people who have committed offenses in the name of ZANU-PF, but nothing has ever been done. We know that the problem in Zimbabwe, as far as the rule of law is concerned, is the selective application of the law, and that is completely wrong.
Alex, let me just ask Psychology something, because we're very close to the end of the programme. Psychology, as a ruling party, when you see a movement where the citizens of Zimbabwe are asking for better governance, better government, what is your response to this movement?
Well, our response is very clear. Number one, and I'll repeat this, we believe that these guys are entitled to expressing their views in any manner possible, in any manner that is within the ambit of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. That is their entitlement. We have no problems with that. We begin to have problems when people begin to call for people to stay away in a way that is violent, in a way that is destructive. We begin to have issues when people are claiming to do things that will improve the Zimbabwean economy when in fact those actions are detrimental.
So Psychology, may I just repeat this one more time to keep us focused, because we only have a couple of minutes to the end of this show. Psychology, what is the government's response to this movement for a request for the government to serve the people better? What is the response?
The response is that there are basic, normal citizens going about their exercising their constitutional rights. And we have no business interfering with that. But they ought to exercise their constitutional right in a lawful and legitimate manner, and in a way that is not destructive.
So Psychology, it sounds like you're okay for people to campaign, but you actually don't want to do anything in response.
If I may
yeah,
jump in. I think what Psychology is saying is interesting and problematic on so many levels. I don't understand how a staying in your home is destructive or a call to violence. And I don't understand how, when he says this flag, what is the point of this flag when it's our flag? The clarification that he needs is, yes, it is our flag. As citizens of Zimbabwe, it is our flag. And so we have right as citizens for claims making, for nation building. And if we have to build alternative parallel structures to what currently exists, then we will do so, because what we're not getting is that.
2 years ago, Alex, if this had happened in Zimbabwe, what do you think would have been the result? People were actually speaking out and criticising the government, the ruling party. That's unusual. So
yes, but what we have to understand, of course, is that Zimbabwe is going through a lot of changes, has gone through a lot of changes in the last 3 years. The ZANU-PF itself is going through serious challenges, factionalism in the party. Not everybody in ZANU-PF is opposed to what the people are doing. They are raising legitimate concerns, as Psychology
and Psychology actually said that, yes, of course.
Absolutely. So there is consensus, I think, among a lot of people that there are issues that people are raising.
Alex, I'm going to leave it there because we're out of time. It's amazing how fast the show goes when there's so many interesting things to talk about. Omo, where do you want to leave us?
Closing thought with the community. Jeffta over here says, for the first time in years, the people have spoken in one voice. I take it as just the beginning of a revolution.
It's really good to hear from you, Jacqueline, and Farai, Psychology, and Alex. Thank you very much for being part of this conversation about This Flag campaign. It will continue online and offline as well, I'm sure. And you can continue the conversation with #AJStream. I'm Femi OK. I'll see you online. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.